When my daughter-in-law handed me a cardboard box and told me I had until Friday to be out of my own house, I didn't say a word. I just stood there in my kitchen. The kitchen I'd renovated myself 23 years ago. The one with the cracked tile near the back door that I'd always meant to fix. And I looked at her, and I thought, how did it come to this? But before I tell you what happened next, I need to ask you something. Have you ever loved someone so much that you let them hurt you, over and over because you couldn't imagine the alternative? That's the question I've been sitting with for the past 2 years, and I think I finally have an answer. My name is Edgar. I'm 67 years old. I live in Hamilton, Ontario. And what I'm about to tell you is the truth. My son-in-law's mother's Lien, not shy exactly, more like careful. He took his time before he spoke, before he acted, before he committed to anything. His mother used to say he was an old soul. She said it like it was an old soul. She said it like it was a compliment. After she passed, breast cancer, 11 years ago, it was just the two of us for a long time. Brendan was 32 by then and already established in his career, a project manager at a construction firm downtown. We weren't the kind of father and son who talked every day, but we had Sunday dinners, and we had the Leafs, and that was enough. Then he met Felicity. I want to be fair here. I want to be honest. When I first met her, I liked her. She was sharp, funny, confident in a way that balanced Brendan's quietness. She worked in finance, mortgage brokerage, something like that, and she had opinions about everything. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within a year, they were married. I gave them my blessing, and I meant it. The house question came up about 8 months into the marriage. Brendan called me on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual. He usually texted. He said Felicity had been thinking, and they both thought it made more sense financially if they moved in with me rather than kept paying rent on their condo near Stony Creek. My house was paid off. It had 3 bedrooms and a finished basement. It made sense on paper. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He was my son. That was my first mistake. It didn't happen overnight. That's the thing people don't understand about this kind of situation. It's not like one morning you wake up and your life has been taken. It's slow. It's one small adjustment after another, and each one seems reasonable on its own. And by the time you realize what's happened, you're standing in your own hallway feeling like a guest. The first few months were fine, mostly. Brendan and Felicity paid for groceries sometimes, helped with yard work. But Felicity had a way of reorganizing things. The kitchen cabinets got rearranged for efficiency. My old recliner in the living room was moved to the basement because it didn't go with the sectional they were bringing from the condo. Small things, always framed as improvements. Then her brother showed up. His name was Chad. I don't know how else to describe him except to say that he was the kind of man who fills a room in a way that makes you want to leave it. He was 38, between jobs, which seemed to be his permanent condition, and he needed a place to stay just for a few weeks. Felicity asked me directly, which I respected. I said 2 months maximum. He was there for 14 months. During those 14 months, Chad ate my food, used my truck without asking twice, and once invited 6 of his friends over on a Wednesday night without telling anyone. I came downstairs at 11 o'clock to find strangers in my kitchen. I stood at the top of the stairs for a full minute before going back up. I didn't sleep that night. What bothered me most wasn't Chad, though. It was that when I brought up my concerns to Brendan, quietly, privately, the way I'd always tried to handle things, he'd listen, nod, and then nothing would change. The next morning, Felicity would be cheerful at the breakfast table, and I would have this hollow feeling in my chest, like something important had been said and immediately buried. I started taking longer walks. The money conversation happened in February. I remember because there was a bad ice storm that week, and the schools had been closed, and everyone was stuck inside together, which I think is why things finally came to a head. Felicity had been asking me on and off for several months about refinancing the house. She was in the business, she said. Rates were shifting. It would be smart to pull some equity while we could. I always changed the subject. The house was paid off. I liked it that way. It was the one thing in my life that felt completely solid. That February evening, she came to me with papers, actual printed documents which told me this had been planned for some time. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table and she said, and I'm recalling this as precisely as I can, Edgar, Brendan and I have been talking, and we really think this is the best path forward for the whole family. I looked at the papers. They were documents to transfer the house into joint ownership. Me, Brendan, and Felicity. I read them twice. Then I set them down and said I'd think about it. You've been thinking about it for months, she said. Her voice was still even, still pleasant, but there was something underneath it now. It's my house, Felicity. She smiled, not warmly. Of course it is. We're just trying to plan for the future, for Brendan's future. I'd think you'd want that. I went to bed without signing anything. The next 3 weeks were the coldest I'd ever experienced in that house, and I don't mean the weather. Brendan barely spoke to me. Meals were quiet. I'd come into a room and conversations would stop. I was 66 years old and being given the silent treatment in my own home, and the worst part was I understood why, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I knew Brendan was caught between us and he had chosen a side without realizing he'd done it. I called my friend Alistair. We've been friends since we worked together at Stelco years ago, long retired now, lives out in Ancaster. I told him what was happening. He listened the whole way through without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always valued about him. Get a lawyer, he said when I was done. It's my son. I know who it is. Get a lawyer. I didn't. Not yet. I kept hoping things would level out. They did not level out. The day Felicity told me I needed to leave was a Thursday in March. I know the exact date, the 14th, because it was 2 days before my late wife's birthday, which I always mark quietly. I'd been out that afternoon, just running errands, picking up a few things at the Fortino's on Upper James. When I got back, Brendan's car was in the driveway, and so was Chad's truck, and a vehicle I didn't recognize. I walked in through the side door, the way I always do, and they were all in the living room. Brendan, Felicity, Chad, and a woman I'd never met who turned out to be Felicity's mother. They were sitting like they'd been waiting. Felicity spoke first. She said that things clearly weren't working out, that I had made it impossible to have a productive conversation about the future, that they had found me an apartment. She actually had a printout, a listing from a building on Barton Street, and that it would be best for everyone if I was settled somewhere else by the end of the month. I looked at my son. He was looking at the floor. Brendan, I said. He didn't look up. I stood there for what felt like a long time. Then I said, I'm going to need you to look at me. He looked up. His eyes were red around the edges. He looked like he'd been awake for days. And for just a second, 1 second, I saw my boy, the one who used to fall asleep on the couch watching hockey, who called me after every job interview, who cried at his mother's funeral in a way he thought no one noticed. Then Felicity said, Edgar, we've already discussed this. There's nothing to add. I walked back through the side door. I sat in my truck in the driveway for 40 minutes. Then I drove to Alistair's house. He had the kettle on before I'd finished telling him what happened. That's the kind of friend he is. We sat at his kitchen table until nearly midnight, and by the end of it I had a name, a lawyer, someone Alistair had used years ago for a property dispute, and a plan to call first thing in the morning. I slept on his couch that night. He didn't ask me if I wanted to. He just pulled the blanket out of the closet and set it at the end of the cushions and said, Early riser, so I'll try not to wake you. I didn't sleep much. I lay there in the dark, listening to the house settle, and I thought about my wife, about the way she used to say Brendan was an old soul, about how she never got to see who he became or who he'd let himself be led into becoming. I wondered what she would have said to him. I wondered if it would have made any difference. Probably not, I thought. When someone loves the wrong person deeply enough, they stop being able to hear anyone else clearly. I called the lawyer the next morning. Her name was Constance, and she was direct in a way I appreciated. She told me that because the house was solely in my name and I had signed nothing, my position was solid. She also told me that if I left voluntarily without any formal agreement in place, things could get complicated. "Don't move out," she said. "Not yet." So I went back. I won't pretend it was easy. The atmosphere in that house when I walked back through the door that afternoon was something I'd never experienced before. Not anger exactly, more like a pressure, like the walls themselves were waiting to see what happened next. Felicity looked at me and something moved across her face that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite anger. She said nothing. I went to my bedroom, called Constance, and confirmed our appointment for Tuesday. That weekend was the worst of it. I heard conversations through walls that I was not meant to hear. I heard my name and numbers and the words "power of attorney" spoken in Felicity's voice in a way that made the back of my neck go cold. I heard Chad on the phone in the basement saying something about the old man in a tone I won't repeat. And I heard Brendan, once on Saturday evening, standing just outside my bedroom door. He didn't knock. He just stood there. I could see the shadow of his feet under the door. He stood there for almost a full minute and then walked away. I nearly opened the door. I wish sometimes that I had. The cardboard box appeared on the Monday. I came downstairs that morning and it was sitting on the kitchen counter, folded flat, with a piece of paper on top. The paper was a printed list, my name at the top, and below it, a list of items in the house that Felicity had categorized as communal or belonging to the household. My recliner, my wife's cast iron pan, tools from the garage that I had owned for 30 years. I picked up the box. I looked at the list. I set both back down on the counter. Then I drove to my Tuesday appointment. Constance had done some preliminary research before I arrived. She had questions I hadn't expected. About the mortgage history, about any verbal agreements, about Felicity's professional background. When I mentioned that Felicity worked in mortgages, she wrote something down and asked me to say more about the refinancing conversation. I told her everything I remembered, the documents, the timing, the way it had all been framed. Constance was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'd like to look into something before we go further. Is that all right?" I said yes. 3 days later, she called me. I was sitting in my truck in a Tim Hortons parking lot on Fennell when my phone rang. She told me, carefully, professionally, that she'd found something in a title search. There was a lien on the property I had no knowledge of. It had been registered 8 months prior. The name on the documentation was Felicity's mortgage brokerage. I sat there with my coffee going cold in my hand. She told me this was serious. She told me there were potentially several legal avenues and that she wanted to bring in a colleague who handled fraud cases. She told me we needed to move quickly. I said, "How did this happen without my signature?" She was quiet for a moment. "That's exactly what we need to find out." What happened next I'm only going to summarize because some of it is still working through the legal system, and I've been advised to be careful about what I say publicly, but I'll tell you what I can. The lien was fraudulent. Constance's colleague confirmed it within 2 weeks. The documentation had been forged. My signature on paperwork I had never seen, never held, never sat across a table and agreed to. The brokerage Felicity worked for was already under investigation by FSRA, the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario, for a separate matter. Our case became part of a larger picture. Charges were filed. I don't take pleasure in saying that. I want to be honest about that. There is no version of this that feels like winning. Brendan's wife was charged with mortgage fraud and forgery. Chad was eventually implicated in a related matter involving false documentation. The house, my house, became the subject of a legal process that took nearly 18 months to fully resolve. And Brendan didn't know. That's what the investigation determined, and more importantly, that's what I believe. Not because I need to, not because it makes things easier, but because I know my son. When Constance's colleague sat across from him and laid out what had been done under his roof and partly in his name, Brendan broke down in a way I hadn't seen since his mother's funeral. He called me that evening. He didn't say much. He said, "Dad, I'm so sorry." That was it at first. Just that. I didn't say it was fine because it wasn't. I didn't tell him it didn't matter because it did. I said, I know. And I meant that I knew he was sorry, and I knew he hadn't known, and I knew we had a long way to go. That was the beginning of something, though. Not an ending, a beginning. The lien was removed. Felicity was convicted on 2 counts and received a conditional sentence with strict terms, including repayment obligations. The brokerage was shut down. Chad took a plea deal on the related charge. My house is still mine. I'm sitting in it right now, actually. The cracked tile near the back door is still there. I've decided I like it. The recliner is back in the living room where it belongs, and the cast iron pan is hanging on the wall above the stove where my wife always kept it. On Sunday evenings, Brendan comes for dinner, just the 2 of us. He doesn't bring much conversation, and I don't expect him to. We watch whatever game is on, and I make something on the stove, and we eat at the table like we used to. It's not the same as before. I'm not sure it ever will be. But there's something there between us now that is honest in a way. It maybe wasn't before, because before we never had to test it. Now we have. And it held. I want to say one more thing before I finish. When Constance first started asking me questions, she asked me at one point why I hadn't hired a lawyer sooner, why I'd waited so long to protect myself. I thought about it. I said, because I kept thinking it would go back to normal on its own. She nodded like she'd heard that before. She probably had. I've thought about that answer a lot since then. The thing is, I don't regret being the kind of person who believed that. I'm 67 years old, and I spent most of my life trying to lead with trust rather than suspicion, and I don't want to stop being that person just because someone took advantage of it. What I do differently now is this. I pay attention sooner. I name what I see sooner. I don't wait for things to go back to normal if normal was never right to begin with. My friend Alistair told me last spring, when all of this was mostly behind us, that I was lucky. Could have been much worse, he said. We were having lunch at his place, and he was right. But here's what I think. Luck is part of it. Good legal advice is part of it. Good friends are part of it. And the rest of it is just the decision, made over and over, to not let what someone else did make you into something you're not. My wife used to say that the hardest thing about getting older wasn't the body slowing down. It was staying soft in a world that keeps giving you reasons to harden. I think she was right about that, the same way she was right about most things. The tile is still cracked. The pan is on the wall. The game is on Sunday. That's enough. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over you after something like this. Not peace exactly, more like the stillness after a long storm, when the air still smells like rain, and you're not quite sure yet what the wind took with it. I think about Felicity sometimes, not with bitterness, or at least I try not to. I think about what it takes for a person to sit across a kitchen table from someone, look them in the eye, and hand them papers built on a lie. Whatever she told herself to make that feel acceptable, I'll never know. But I do know this. What she did came back to her in full, not because the universe keeps score in some mystical ledger, but because dishonesty of that scale leaves evidence. It always does. The lies she built were the same lies that undid her. That's not karma in any religious sense. That's just the plain, unglamorous logic of cause and effect, the way things tend to collapse under their own weight when the foundation was never honest to begin with. What I'm more interested in, looking back, is what I could have done differently, and I think the honest answer is I could have paid attention sooner. Not suspicion. I don't think I should have walked around my own house treating my son's wife like a suspect. But there's a difference between trust and willful blindness, and somewhere along the way I let one become the other. When the cabinet got reorganized, when the recliner disappeared, when the refinancing papers appeared on the table, each of those moments was telling me something. I heard it. I just chose not to act on it. That's on me. Understanding the difference between what we see and what we're willing to see. That takes a kind of honest self-examination that doesn't always feel comfortable. But it's necessary. It's how you protect not just your house, but yourself. And then there's Brendan. I've thought a lot about what it means that my son didn't know. About how a person can live inside a lie they didn't build and still be shaped by it. He made choices, small ones, daily ones, that kept him from seeing what was right in front of him. He chose comfort over clarity, and that cost both of us. What brought him back wasn't grand or dramatic. It was just the moment when the truth became impossible to avoid, and instead of running from it, he made the harder choice to face it. That took something real. It took the kind of steadiness that doesn't announce itself. It just shows up, quietly, when everything else has fallen away. I'm not a man who wraps things up neatly. Life in your late 60s doesn't work that way, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. What I can tell you is that I still have my house. I still have my son, imperfectly and honestly. I still have Alistair, who made tea without being asked, and pulled a blanket from the closet without making a thing of it. The cracked tile is still there by the back door. I've decided it can stay.